Hey guys, it's Sean here to introduce you to another bonus episode of ReelBlend, where we have a interview with Where the Crawdads Sing director Olivia Newman. Not a full show this week because we have a couple of things in the hopper, a few big If It Happens projects that the minute they do come together, you guys will be the first ones to hear about it. But in the meantime, we got a chance to speak with Olivia about her work on the adaptation for the best-selling novel Where the Crawdads Sing. And it's a really, really great interview about directing in the elements and how she had to take this period book, essentially, and set it, although it's supposed to be set in North Carolina, bring it to Louisiana and all the challenges that come with that. I also wanted to say at the top of the show that we are making a change to the blend game this week. We're going to change it up to go with the theme of Nope and the fact that it's a scary movie coming back to theaters, especially in the summertime. We're going to play hashtag #ScareBlend. And what we want to do is come up with the movie that made you most scared when you were in a theater, the movie that you were watching that just had you crawling out of your skin and essentially just, hiding your eyes in your chair. We want to be able to come up with your choice for the movie that made you the most scared in a theater. And again, we're going to call that hashtag #ScareBlend. I'll repeat that at the end after the interview with Olivia Newman. But in the meantime, I wanted to throw it to that because this is a really great adaptation. I had not read this book. I know the book is super popular. It's backed by Reese Witherspoon and her book club, and she's a producer on it as well, too. And it's just a really terrific story that covers a lot of ground. And Olivia is going to talk about how difficult it is to sort of chop down an adaptation of a novel into a workable 2-hour premise. And she's just a really exciting filmmaker that I think we're going to want to keep an eye on because of the way that she approaches this material and works with her actors, and the work that she did with her cinematographer to capture the nature, as we discuss at length in this interview, is really, really impressive and worth seeing on the big screen. So without further ado, this is the ReelBlend interview with Olivia Newman on behalf of the new film, Where the Crawdads Sing.
Well, one of our co-hosts isn't here today, but we're three best friends who just started a show that we just kind of dive into filmmaking and the intricate details of the process. So
great. Just
get as geeky as you want to get.
Well, you were my favorite conversation because you actually want to talk about the the craft, which is great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You did such an amazing work on this. So Sean, I'm going to let you go ahead and start this off, man.
Man, now I have to raise my game. I feel like the bar has been set incredibly high. Kevin does that, unfortunately. All right, so I want to start with the Marsh, obviously, which is a character in the movie. And I honestly believe that your use of location was really intoxicating. It really made me so happy that I got to see this on a big screen because of the way that you pulled back to sort of capture as much of the background as possible. And I know you put a lot of emphasis on nature photography, and it's really magnificent. But I want to know what some of the downsides to filming in a marsh are, because you went to such great lengths to get this photography, but I know it couldn't have been easy.
Yeah. Oh, where do I begin? Well, let's see. The hardest thing about making the movie was the weather. So that's just, we were shooting in Louisiana in May and June. We chose May because it's supposedly a drier month. So we had front loaded all of our exteriors to May and saved our cover sets for June. But we ended up getting an unprecedented amount of rain in May. I mean, broke records. And so we kept having to shoot, our cover sets early. And so what the crazy thing that happened was we had so much rain that all of our exterior sets, like Kaya's yard and Jump-In's, where we had built Jump-In's store, by the time it stopped raining and the sun finally came out, they were all underwater. I mean, there was a lake around Kaya's house. You couldn't get to it. You literally was a lake surrounding our house. Jump-In's dock was underwater, so we couldn't even shoot on boats. So we had this beautiful 5 days of the most beautiful sunny weather, and we had to shut down. It was excruciating. We couldn't even, I kept saying, well, why don't we get out on boats? Why don't we start shooting on the boats? But you couldn't load on the boats because all of the, docks were underwater.
Right.
So it was, it's not just the torrential rain, but then you have the rising tides. One of the things that we learned the hard, we had chosen this perfect place to build Kaya's house. We knew we wanted to shoot it on location in a place where we could go from inside her house to outside her house seamlessly with the camera. I didn't want to be shooting on a stage and then, and using blue screen. We wanted to be immersed in the landscape because what you see in Kaya's world is she brings the marsh into her house over time. Absolutely. More and more of the marsh comes into her house. So we wanted that to be fluid. Well, we picked this beautiful spot to build it, and the rising tides would bring water up to like halfway up her yard in the middle of the day. So we'd shoot a whole scene looking one way. In the morning, we'd go for lunch and come back and it would be underwater. And we'd suddenly have to reblock it closer to the house or figure out how are we going to not show that, this is all underwater. And it turned into a mud fest. So then her whole yard was one giant mud pit for a while. And our poor greensmen were having to bring in greens constantly to hide it. And, we'd have cameras out there in the mud. I mean, I have so many pictures of my clothes that are just covered in mud because it just turned into such a... Anyway, so
I don't even want to ask about mosquitoes because I can't imagine mosquitoes in Louisiana.
Oh my God.
In May.
I have to say I was most worried about the bugs and the snakes and the alligators, and they were the least of our problems. They really were. We discovered an amazing natural bug spray that we got from this they do these kayaking tours on the bayou, and we bought it from one of these places that does tours. They carried this bug spray, and they swore this works even at sunset when the mosquitoes come out, and it truly did. So we had the bugs covered. We had netting that we wore if we needed to. But it was the weather and the tides and the rising. That was what was really hard.
You were like, how's Toronto this time of year?
It's funny because Olivia and I were talking earlier for the television junket, and one of the things I was talking to you about was the sound design, because one of the things I really loved about the film, which made me really lean in, was when we would be inside the house and then you would hear somebody arrive, whether they be on a boat or a car, and like you would be as an audience member wondering who was arriving. And to your point about walking in and out of the house and not doing a shot on location and then a shot on stage, like these like almost like wonders in a way where just she'll leave the house, go out the door, go into the marsh. It's a really kind of a special thing from an immersion perspective, but in terms of like film and media and books, they're two completely different mediums, and there are things that work in a film world that don't work in a book world, vice versa. Was there something in the book that you just couldn't achieve in the film world, or something that maybe you manipulated to work in the film world? Like, what was the most challenging aspect of the story to bring to film? And was there something you wish you could have done that just wasn't possible?
I think, the book it's structured differently. You go into different characters' points of view in different chapters. And so you get to explore these other characters in their own worlds. And I just felt that for the movie, we wanted to be rooting for Kaya and following Kaya as much as possible. That if this was a 10-episode television series, then we could have all of these different characters and their perspectives. But for a 2-hour movie, where I wanted to make sure we could capture the romance and the mystery and her survival tale, and what happens in her childhood, and there was no way we were going to be able to give all of those characters that much of our time, which I would have loved to do. I would love to adapt this to a television series someday and be able to do that. But so that was the challenging thing, is how do we maintain these relationships that are so important to Kaya's arc without giving them their own chapters? So how can we get across as much as possible through Kaya's eyes who Tate is, who Chase is, who Mabel and Jumpin are to her, but still, make them feel really rich and lived in and full characters without necessarily going into all of their worlds. So I think that was one of the challenging things about adapting it to a movie.
Was there a shot that you in the book when you were reading it, like that you envisioned as a filmmaker that you and Polly that you could pull off and you go, all right, that's how I envisioned it when I read it, and then the way we shot it is exactly how I envisioned it when I read it?
there is the shot where Tate. I don't know if I should give this away. It's a spoiler. Okay, let me think of a shot that is not a spoiler. It's just about to give away a big spoil. There is the image of Kaya's mother leaving and holding the blue suitcase and wearing, her alligator heels. And, that is such a vivid image in the book. And it's also one of those images that as a mother just was gutting to me. I had to put the book down and cry and like give myself a minute before I could go back. Cause it's just, you can't imagine the state that woman had to be in order to do that. And so capturing that visual was so important. And the path that she goes down and, the place where we built her house, if you look one way, you're looking into this gorgeous lagoon with the cypress trees and the Spanish moss. And if you look the other way, it's wide open space and there's a giant mansion called the Otis House. Okay. And there are all these big, beautiful live oak trees, with those drooping limbs and the Spanish moss, but it's wide open. And my production designer, Sue Chan, said, this is where we should build Kaya's house. And I said, Sue, it needs to feel nestled into the middle of nowhere in the woods. And there needs to be a path for Ma. And how are we going to do this? And she had a vision for how she could bring in greens and use the trees that were already there and put, and mix in greens and create that scent. We had woods off to the left, but over to the right was a mansion. Mm-hmm. And so she managed with her greens team and her incredible crew to create the sense that you are really in the middle. Every time I look at Kaya's house, I cannot believe how it feels so remote. And she created that path for Ma. It was a lot of discussion about how the path should wind and which branches we should use to create that sort of, curvature. And it was, I remember when we shot the scene of Ma coming back down the path, we were all in tears at the monitor because that's it's a really, without giving anything away, it's a very powerful moment in the book as well. So, yeah.
Olivia, I have to ask real fast while you're talking about production, did you build the fire tower itself or did you find an existing structure?
So, interestingly, our associate producer, Veronica, who's my assistant on the shoot, she has family down in Louisiana, and her uncle knew of this fire tower that was on this remote piece of land that was exactly how it's described in the boat, where you go up to the top and you look out and it's marshland. It is not accessible by road, and there's no practical way to shoot up in a fire tower that high. But we were able to use it as our model, and we got drone footage, for our plates we went right down to that fire tower and used a drone to get all of our surrounding plates. And then we chose a location where we built the base of it. And then the rest is extension going all the way up.
Okay, because I was going to say it's weathered perfectly. Like it really made me believe that you found an existing
when he took his foot and he pushes the grate over the hole like that. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, we built the base of it in one location, and then we did the top of it against green screen.
Movie magic, isn't it amazing? Okay, so I want to focus on because now that you say it, and as somebody who hadn't read the book going into the movie, you don't realize until the end exactly how much time you cover and how much ground has to be covered. You essentially covered 2 full relationships in Kaya's life.
Yes.
Not to mention all of the legal aspects of it, which you have to get into. And I think you balance it all beautifully, but at the heart of it, Daisy and Taylor need to have chemistry.
Yes.
For the story to really work. So I want to know if you remember the first time that you realized, I'm good. They have a spark, because I think that they had a real ignition between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I saw Taylor read, it's interesting. Taylor read for Chase first, and it was it was not the right energy, because Taylor has that genuine warmth, that is Tate. And when I heard him read Tate, I had that feeling of, oh my God, that's the guy who's just pure love. And that really is Taylor. Every time he would come to set, we would say, oh, here comes our ray of sunshine, because we'd be shooting all this sort of darker material and, hard childhood and, and then we'd have a scene with Taylor and Daisy. It was, what a relief we get to go into this happiness. But when they did a chemistry read together and, you felt that connection and it's a very specific Kaya and Tate connection where it is not, it's not that electric chemistry. It is a deep, deep love. It is a deep respect. And it's more of an intellectual connection between those characters. And so it had to be a different kind of chemistry. And, they, as people, they get along so well. And there's a real genuine friendship there that I think really comes through.
Awesome. So helpful.
Olivia, I fell in love with Kaya's character. I wish I could have met her because I just loved her curiosity. She's a badass. I also thought little details like how she didn't want her name cut in the cake. And I'm like, I love the way she viewed the world. I mean, there was something about the way you and Polly captured her face, even her first shot where her eyes are closed and she opens up and she's breathing behind that tree. For you to be behind that camera and then stop production and then you're finished and you go into editing and post, now you're promoting the film. Do you miss that character? I mean, because I feel like being behind that camera to witness what Daisy did, it's a revelation. That performance is phenomenal. And I just wonder how special that was to be behind that camera. And then do you kind of miss being on set with her, Kaya specifically? Yeah,
no, it's funny that you should ask that because that's how it is how it feels. And I remember in, the last stretch of editing, my wonderful editor, Alan Bell, saying, I'm going to miss this. And usually in the edit, you get kind of tired of it or you need a break because you can't see straight anymore. And you don't know if anything's working or not working because you've just been looking at it over and over. And I never got tired of it because I loved being in her world. I really and I Daisy is so captivating and, I would forget what I was, we'd be watching to check for sound or to see if a cue worked. And I would just get pulled into watching the movie and I would have to say, oh, wait, stop and go back. I got sucked in again. Let me look at it again. This time I'll listen,
Because you're in it. Yeah.
You're in it. And, I think I think Kaya is a really special and unique view of the world. And that's really what drew me to the material is, oh my God, I want to tell the story of this young woman who I've never seen on screen before, but I want to tell it through her eyes. I want to experience the marsh through Kaya's eyes because she sees things in a way that other people don't. And her experience of that landscape is so different from other people. And, the way that she feels loneliness so deeply means that when she actually connects with another person, it is so meaningful to her. Oh, yeah. There's so much weight to her taking that feather from Tate is a huge moment for her because she spent so much time hiding from other people, so just being able to dive into that character's world was, I never got tired of it. And I miss it all the time. Every time I have to go and, you have to come back and, I had to go and do a screening the other morning for Dolby. And I was just going to spot check it because it was just a slightly different color grade. And they started playing it and I got sucked in again. And suddenly I looked at my watch and said, oh God, I have to start spot checking and I have to be out of here because I just don't, I never got tired of it.
It's special. It's a special performance, and it really is a special character. So it really is.
Well, I want to get transition to another really special character, an actor who we've admired forever, is David Strathairn, and how fantastic he is. I'm a sucker for courtroom thrillers anyway, and so anytime you get those scenes, you just know you're teeing up an actor, to deliver outstanding material. So, what were those days like? How comforting was it to just hand the material over to David and watch him go?
We shot his material the last 2 weeks of our production. So we had this feeling of we'd all gone to war because it was such a battle. And then we had 5 days in a courtroom where we thought, nothing can stop us. No torrential, it's we have 5 days inside. And then we had jail cell scenes to shoot with him. So it's we were going to finally be safe. And he was like, this, I don't know, just this gift at the end of a really grueling shoot to then walk into the hands of, a legend who we just, those courtroom scenes, he has so many, speeches and, just these moments with different characters. And we had all these amazing day players that we had cast for the, the different characters in the town that I was so excited, they were so excited to work with him. And we had lots of extras in the gallery, of course, all the time, and after every one of his takes, everybody would start clapping, just spontaneously applaud as if they were watching a play, because that's what it felt like. You could watch him do take after take after take and not get tired of it, because he's so incredibly present. Every take is different. You can watch somebody who saw an early cut, a friend of mine who saw an early cut of the film said, you can watch David shift in his chair and you're glued to the screen. I mean, every moment is real and and deep, and I think Daisy just loved those days because she didn't have to say anything, and she got to work with this with this legendary actor who just brought an entirely new energy to the whole movie. It was really fun.
There are moments when like an answer goes their way, and he just very quietly gives her and then me a comfort.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, good. This is going in the right direction.
Yes.
Or letting her draw. That I loved those little, like, even just watching him get up from his chair. You're so right about the movement. Like, there was something about that way that was done.
Yes.
It was like graceful, like in a very interesting way.
Yes. He's such an interesting character because he's retired, but he's come back to do this thing. He's known her since she was a child, and never did much for her, but now recognizes that this is a time where he can actually, do something and make a difference. And he's, reflecting on his own, life and the way that, he, like so many of the townspeople, either ignored or at worst, ostracized this young woman. And, for what? Because she was poor and because she was, living by little means. And so he really allows us as an audience to sort of reflect on our own prejudices and biases and how ingrained they are, and, how we can go through life and not realize that we have completely overlooked or underestimated somebody based on those, sort of sometimes very subconscious biases.
We're talking about the feather and how important that becomes to the story and the friendships and the relationships and the characters. I was just curious, for you growing up, did you have anything that you collected like that meant a lot to you that you then continued collecting in your life? Something that kind of was that important to you?
Interesting. The one thing that comes to mind is I was an avid journaler as a kid. I would just fill journal after journal after journal, which, Kaya does as well. And, I have, boxes of these journals from childhood still in my parents' house. I'm sure they're desperate for me to get rid of. But, that definitely spoke to me, all of her notes and her, her diaries and her observations. That was definitely a big part of my childhood.
Is it ever your hand in the movie writing?
Like James Cameron style?
Never.
Titanic. Because isn't that James Cameron's hand in Titanic? Drawing?
It is. Yes, he's got a sketch.
There's no Hitchcockian cameos.
Where's that Olivia Newman cameo? It's right there. It's the hand drawing the A.
Delia is in the movie. Delia does has a cameo, and you will have to look for it, but she's very prominent.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Wait, can you give us a hint? We've seen it, obviously.
Because it will be very distracting. Once you know, then that's all you will focus on in the scene.
Wait, did you ask her to do it? Did she want to do it? How did that happen?
We asked her. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That is very cool. Awesome. All right. So any film coming out to theaters, looking for any kind of boost, would love having Taylor Swift say, "I'm going to write a song for you," to attach on your credits.
Yeah.
Tell me how you felt the first time that you heard the song that she had turned over. And are you able to even give her notes Can you listen to it and say, I need a little bit more of this? Or
Well, she wrote the song before we had shot the film. So, so that's a kind of a nerve-wracking thing, because you think, well, I haven't shot the film, so how do I know if the song is going to work? But what was amazing was, so when I listened to it, I had no idea what to expect. And, it was a bit nerve-wracking. But when I played it, I had an incredibly emotional response to it. And I think it's because for me, it evoked that childhood trauma that Kaya experiences, her loss of her mother, her longing for her mother, and her feeling completely isolated and ostracized because, of being abandoned. And so I had a very strong reaction to it. And the feeling it left me with was the same feeling I had when I finished the book. And so immediately I thought, well, this is the feeling I want to have at the end of the movie. I already know what the movie's ending is going to be. And so this will be perfect. This will be the perfect song to sit and listen to as we're absorbing what we just witnessed. And then you kind of cross your fingers and hope, well, once I shoot it, I hope it still works, because I would love for this song to be the perfect fit for the end of the movie. But it was an unusual thing, because the song was already written and recorded before we shot the film. So it was quite serendipitous that it worked so well.
That's awesome. It really does.
Well, we love talking filmmaking here, and one of the things I always found fascinating, and this is going to be a different jump, but I think it'll make sense in the question. But I remember Christopher Nolan talking about how hard it was to film on boats in Dunkirk, and obviously you're dealing with two different bodies of water here and things like that. But you do have a lot of shots on boats, and you have things like that, which I would imagine are complicated to pull off. And
yes.
I just remember him talking about how hard just shooting on a boat was, and I just wondered, what your experience was, even though these are very different boats, a very different body of water. What challenges boating kind of gave you?
I'd say the weather and the boats were the two hardest parts of shooting this movie. It's really challenging shooting on boats, and especially in the marshlands, the water can be very shallow. So you have to go out and find areas that are deep enough for your fleet of boats, because you're not just shooting, you don't just have your camera boat and your picture boat. You've got a fleet of boats for the rest of the crew. You have porta potties on a floating barge. And if you have to go to the bathroom, you've got to get boated from, so it's a logistical, it's a very big logistical challenge. And then the other thing is that you're out in the water in the blazing sun, especially in the marshlands where there's no tree cover. And so, it's hot. And then, boats don't just sit still. So you have to anchor them. Yeah. And so you would pick your spot and, what the frame was, but then, getting the boat to be in exactly the right spot, or, you have somebody, motoring up and then they stop. And then how do you get their boat to actually not start drifting? And so it's immensely challenging. It's immensely challenging.
Your answer is why we do this show. We want people to understand, because that's the thing. It looks so simple, not simple, but it looks so beautiful and seamless when you watch it. But I had no idea you had boats with porta potties to the right and or left of the frame. That's wild.
And we wanted to shoot in locations that were as wild and as possible, which meant getting as far from any kind of civilization as you can, because you don't want to see houses in the marshland. You want to be out, as remote as possible. But the more remote you go, then you have to bring everything with you. So, Yeah, it was very challenging.
That's a perfect way for us to bring this to an end. I'll kick you off on this one. Is that I want to celebrate Polly Morgan and the work that she did alongside you. Because again, the way I sort of started the interview is the beauty of the cinematography of the film. There's a reason why that backdrop is behind you too, because it really does evoke what you guys captured. And so if you could just talk a bit about the conversations you guys had early about what you wanted to get out of, because I think that your frames are set up in a way to capture as much of the location as possible, so that we know that you went through what you went through in order to get it. And it really does set a tone for this movie that I think is truly special.
Yeah. Polly was one of my, most treasured collaborators on this movie. And from our very first meeting, we felt so in sync. I mean, she, whenever you are, trying to get a job on a film, you have to put together a visual lookbook to show how you're imagining what the movie will look like. And our pitch decks were almost identical. I mean, we were drawing from the same references, Jane Campion and Terrence Malick. And we already had a common language. She's a perfectionist, sometimes to a fault, but it's the way that she lights is exquisite. And she also, when we were talking about, shooting the landscape, the time of day was always very specific. So we have a scene that takes place at dusk, a really important emotional scene in the movie. And we had to shoot it over 3 days because you only get an hour at dusk, right? So we had to break up it's a pretty short moment, but if we were going to shoot with that perfect blue of the, dusky sky, it had to be just right. And then we had this vision of, when Kaya's waiting on the beach for Tate to come home. And I said, I want it to have these hidden dissolve, I want it to dissolve and to see the passage of time in the same frame. And so picking when we scheduled it, it was like, this shot needs to happen at this time. Then we'll go off and get this piece. Then we'll come back and we'll shoot, it was like the scheduling of it was very, very precise so that we could capture, sunsets on the beach is exquisite. But if you don't get there at just the right time, you're going to miss it. Right. And so there was so much attention to detail. And when we were putting together our shot list, we would take images from, movies that were inspiring to us to say, we want to make sure we frame this close up of Daisy. We want the camera to be from this higher angle. And we would put, the image in our shot list so that when we were on set, it was a quick shortcut to say, this is what we're thinking. And, she put all of our, visual images in the camera truck so that everybody on her team knew exactly what movie we were making. So we were all in sync and all on the same page. And I just have to, throw a shout out to Mitch Dubin, who was our camera operator, who's also a legend. And just, we shot a lot of this on remote head so that we could create this sort of moving lyrical camera. And, every idea that we had, Mitch would take it to the next level. He was a wonderful collaborator and really just gave gave movement to the camera, that sort of like lyrical dance that, it was just exquisite.
And you see that in that oneer, which I mentioned to you earlier, where it's like it's almost like stitched, but like in a beautiful way, where you're going around the room during the biology book moment. I thought that was freaking awesome, man.
That was one of the more challenging days. So every time you bring that up, because we had to shoot it poor man style with hidden cuts, and normally you would shoot something like that on an actual MoCo, that we could not afford, and we couldn't. It would have weighed too much for our set to be able to handle. So we had to shoot it with these hidden cuts, amazing. And it was just excruciating.
I wish we had more time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We really appreciate
really fun
it.
chatting with you.
Thank you so much to our friends at Sony for setting up that interview with Olivia Newman. Make sure you guys go check out Where the Crawdads Sing when it hits theaters. Really, I'm so glad that I got a chance to see it on the big screen, because the photography that they capture in this and the way that the marsh really comes to life and actually serves as a character is truly phenomenal. And it just seems that, like, in the summertime, when we're constantly talking about the comic book blockbusters and the visual effects things that drive the industry nowadays, when an adult drama comes around like this, it's really worth highlighting. And I think people who are looking for something a little more substantial at theaters are going to find it in this adaptation of Where the Crawdads Sing. So one more reminder, and you guys will see it on our social feeds. We're changing up the blend game for this week, and we want you guys to participate as much as possible on the social feeds, or if you want to send us an email at ReelBlend@cinemablend.com. We're changing it to #ScareBlend. It is the movie that made you the most scared when you saw it in a theater. Let's go with theater. I don't want to go with the watching it at home on streaming. That's cheating. I want you guys to be in a darkened movie theater, potentially surrounded by other people who are basically just burying your head in your burying your head in your hands and hiding it away from the screen because you're just too terrified to watch what's going on the screen. Hashtag ScareBlend. Use that and we will read it on next week's show. We'll be back with a full show next week where we're going to talk about Jordan Peele's Nope and hopefully a few other really exciting things that we can talk about in next week's show. So keep it right here.